boyfriend and I are currently hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in California. Traffic jams are common along the trail, and most of the people who live in the towns bordering the trail are pretty nice. They also seem like safe people. Emphasis on the imaginary. Well, today we found ourselves a bit lost after trying to take a less traveled alternate trail to avoid the snow-covered main trail. After a long struggle and practically running into the bushes, we came down from the mountain and accidentally ended up on someone's territory. This property is large. It is a large ranch with several different buildings. We tried to get off the property as fast as we could, but one of the ranch dogs saw us, and the owner drove off in a golf cart. I explained that we accidentally got lost on the hike and apologized, and he said that it happens a lot. He was very understanding. He asked us if we wanted a ride into town since he was going to leave anyway. Considering how common the hitch is on the trail and how good he is, we agreed and he drove us into town. On the way, he told us that he used to be in the DEA and was in more shootouts than people who fought in the army. Weird, but okay. Didn't really think about it. I noticed that my boyfriend was very quiet and thought that was strange. But as soon as we hop out of the car, my boyfriend grabs our backpacks and tells me to check my phone. He sent me an article about a guy we just picked up and how the guy was involved in his girlfriend's disappearance and suspicious death on the ranch shortly after. Apparently, his girlfriend went missing 2 weeks after signing over her ranch property to him. She was never found, and a suspicious death on the ranch was a worker killed by an ATV, but toxicology showed an overdose of methamphetamine. Given his DEA background, I found this part particularly suspicious. He is also on the sex offender registry for groping 2 women while on a snowmobile trip. So yes, this article definitely moved me. My boyfriend and I are 100% fine, but like I said, we're just shocked that we've been caught by a possible killer. And honestly, after all the research and reading, I think he did. I think you should be careful who you get your hooks from, even though they may seem friendly. When I was a teenager, I think late middle or high school, my family had a seasonal camping spot. I spent most of my weekends there during the summer, as well as a couple of extended vacations. We had a small group of friends, mostly made up of kids from other seasonal campers, and making friends with the occasional one-time camper wasn't uncommon. But one weekend, at the end of the season, I met Mike. We quickly hit it off and became very good friends, playing and trading Pokemon on our Game Boys, hanging out around campfires, playing basketball, the usual camp stuff. Mike's father invited several family friends over for the weekend, including Andrew. Andrew was a couple of years older than me. He could drive and had a big van that he attached a tent to through the trunk to have what we thought at the time was a pretty nice setup. We also hung out over the long weekend and had a great time. On Sunday, Mike, his father, and most of their group left, but Andrew did not. We hung out a little bit. He would brag about motorcycles, ATVs, and televisions, other things he had in abundance, and kept hinting that we should hang out sometime outside the camp. I said yes, maybe, or something to that effect, knowing that usually camp buddies were never more than camp buddies. However, he eventually went home that Tuesday, and I haven't heard from him since. He gave me his number. I told him I didn't know mine off the top of my head, but I would call him. Important to the rest of the story, Andrew never knew more than my name. My mom did remarry and I didn't have the same last name as hers or my stepfather. Fast forward about a year later, I'm using AOL Instant Messenger, and I get a message from someone with the same name as me with a number added. After a few reluctant messages, they discover it's Andrew. It was a little annoying, so I just blocked him. Second random message, it's him again, same name, but with an increased number on the screen before him. We have been looking into this for about a week, and at this point, I have blocked about 8 of his fake accounts. It gets so bad that I create a new profile with a different email address and make sure I don't include any personal information, even though I'm still pretty sure the original account didn't have it. But about 8 or 9 months ago, there was no word from him. My family is having dinner, and there's a knock on the door. Mom calls me by name and says that apparently I have a friend visiting, and when I arrive, it's Andrew. We politely ask him to leave, and after about 15 minutes, he relents and leaves. Then the calls begin. First from the number registered to it, which was viewed by caller ID. Then the limited numbers are again ignored. then from random numbers with local codes. But when he gets views, usually from younger siblings, he acts like we're best friends, asks me out, offers me free stuff, and I told him to stop calling, but he wouldn't. Mom tells him I moved in with Dad, but the calls kept coming. Eventually, my mom tells him she's going to call the police and things quiet down a bit. Another year has passed and I'm back at camp. I'm walking a friend I met that weekend to her campsite, and this van pulls up next to us and I hear someone call my name. I look around to see Andrew leaning out of his van again. We booked it and ran into a small patch of woods and back to my family's site, and I told my mom what was going on, and she threw back the lid. She ends up knocking on the campsite owner's door, waking them up as it's around 11 p.m. at this point. The police get involved, and he's ordered to never contact me or come to my house again. The next morning, the family staying at the campsite came to talk to my parents. Apparently, they knew Andrew's parents and told them stories about the episodes he would have, and he would need several people to hold him until he calmed down because he would lose control and start acting out and even violent. I also saw him once after that, about 3 years later, slowly moving out of the apartment complex I moved into. Nothing came of it, but I know he saw me, and the fact that I never saw him again makes me worry about what he was doing there that day. This is a nightmare that has stayed with me for years, and I really felt like something supernatural or paranormal was happening to me. Let me first start with how my apartment was set up. This is also important. That's why I rented an apartment in the house. The owner lived in half of the house. Our apartment was the other half. The living room looks like it was one large room but was later divided by French doors to make a bedroom. So when I stand in front of the French doors in bed, I can see through the living room and bedroom windows. However, one day I couldn't breathe. I woke up in bed in a cold sweat, breathing erratically, shaking and slightly dizzy. Probably my blood sugar. Let me check. 155. No, I'm not short. I started to panic because I don't know what happened, only increasing the symptoms. I decided to go to the bathroom, splash water on my face and dry myself with a washcloth. I hung it on the towel rack and went back to the bedroom. On the way back, I was stopped on the spot. Suddenly, I couldn't move. It felt like a dream where you try to walk or run and feel like your feet are covered in cement. I started to go downstairs, desperately trying to reach across the floor to reach my boyfriend's foot to wake him up for help. But suddenly, I wake up in my bed, incoherent. What? I guess it was a dream too. I quickly fell asleep again. Soon I woke up again, as I often do in the middle of the night. I roll over to get comfortable and face the living room window. The blinds are mostly closed but tilted so that you can see the bottom half of the window, and I see a silhouette standing there. I roll away to wake my panicked boyfriend, but before I can wake him, I wake up again. Another dream. I roll back to the window and now I see a face in the window. The best I can describe it was like Darth Maul from Star Wars or that demon from Insidious. I ran to my boyfriend again in a panic, and the same thing happened. Before I could wake him, I would wake up from my sleep, or so I thought. I turned back to the window, and now it was in the living room. I wake up in bed again thinking, oh, I've had dreams where I thought I was awake, but never several dreams like this. I rolled over and now it's right by the French doors. I wake up again, and this time it's on the bedroom side of the door. Again, now he is standing next to me. Again, now he's laying at the foot of my bed just staring at me. Again, he still stood and watched. I repeat this process at least 10, 15 more times, and every time an aura of fear filled the air. The feeling of primal fear was simply terrifying. It never attacked me, but it pulled and scratched my legs a few times. Every time I wake up and see it, it's still there. I start slapping myself, pulling my hair, scratching myself, yelling at it and doing everything I can think of to try and wake up from these nightmares over and over and over. I eventually wake up after what seems like hours of this. I look around and the room is empty. The demon Darth Maul is nowhere to be seen. And it seems that this time, I finally woke up. Tears of fear and relief well up in my eyes as I realize that this horrible dream is over. I laid back down, snuggled up to my boyfriend who was a big spoon, and decided to wake him up to get some much-needed comfort. I shake him awake, and he slowly turns to face me. Except it's not him. It's this thing. I start to scream, but before I can, I wake up again. The feeling of dread is completely gone, and I slap myself a few times to make sure I'm awake this time, and it feels like I'm finally awake. It's about 4 a.m. and I'm absolutely exhausted, but I'm definitely not going back to sleep after this. And the search of the house that has to wait until daylight. I was too scared to leave the bed again, but a few more hours passed and I decided to get out of bed. I wondered what part of the night was part of the dream. Did I really wake up in a cold sweat, check my blood sugar, or even go to the bathroom to wash up? I checked my blood glucose meter, and there was a result. The time I remember getting up for the first time is marked. Then I checked the bathroom and there is a wet washcloth hanging on the towel rack. So apparently I woke up in a cold sweat, had my blood sugar tested, even went to the bathroom. I have no explanation for what happened after that, but it all seems to have happened. If I did go to the bathroom and pass out on the floor, how did I wake up in bed that first time? I know this all sounds silly, but I think maybe my body went back to bed after I washed my face. But somehow, I or my consciousness stayed in the bathroom or something. My body. As I slept, but my soul was perhaps somewhere else. I've never experienced anything like it before or since, no matter how many times I've tried to replicate it. There must be a logical medical explanation for this, or maybe I just had a reaction to something, but I don't know. It was unlike any nightmare I'd had before, and I had them often. But this one just felt so different. This is also not the first time I've experienced something paranormal. I'm pretty sure my childhood home was haunted, or some paranormal sensitivity ran through my mother's side of the family. My childhood home is also my mother's childhood home. My grandmother also lives with us. We are upstairs and she is downstairs. And her mother, my great-grandmother, also lived there and slept in what is now my grandmother's bedroom, but she died before I was born. Also, before I was born, the house had only one floor. My great-grandmother who died was blind and almost deaf until the end, and it is not uncommon for such patients to have auditory, visual, or tactical hallucinations, and she constantly saw and heard people passing through the walls and windows, heard scratching and rumbling, felt them touching her. Again, probably nothing, but given other experiences, I don't know. There may be some validity, even if it is exaggerated. My grandmother often feels someone sitting on her bed at night. When my mother and father were just dating and he was spending the night, one day he woke up and saw a woman rocking in a rocking chair and knitting. When he described what she looked like to my mom, it looked a lot like her grandmother. My mom claims she can astral project, not on purpose, it just happens out of the blue. And in these dreams she can fly around and even into houses we've never been to, only for her to confirm that this is exactly how the house looked after visiting or being invited to a neighbor's house. Also, some other personal experiences I've had in this place are my bed randomly shaking like there's a small earthquake going on, or a really big truck passing by the house or something, but there's never been anything. Earthquakes, too. I lived in New York, so earthquakes were not a common occurrence. I felt taps on my shoulder from behind when I was alone in the kitchen. One day, I woke up in the middle of the night to fetch water from the kitchen and realized my dog was growling. Then this shadow ran through me. There was such a time that in the house of a deceased relative, almost all the paintings immediately fell from the walls. And okay, I know this all sounds like complete BS. All of this is probably true, but sometimes I dream about the future, and not about anything serious. Like I'm walking down a road I've never been on before, and then for the next few days I end up in a place that looks exactly like my dream. I know it might be a déjà vu kind of thing, but sometimes I wake up with injuries I sustained in my dream, like scratches and bruises. But I'm also very clumsy, so that might be an explanation at least. Also, for whatever reason, streetlights often go out when I walk under them, and I get the feeling that I can tell when it's going out. I'm not sure what this has to do with all of this, but it's pretty creepy, let me tell you. Anyway, I just wanted to get it out of the way, and thank you for listening. Even if you don't believe all of this or take my word for it, it's nice to be able to do my paranormal TED Talk and just put it all out there. A few days ago, my girlfriend and I, both in our early 20s, were driving home on a long road trip with our dog. It's been a while since we last stopped, so we stopped at a freeway stop to stretch our legs and let Dogga relax. When we pulled into the stop, there was not a single car, and 3 large semi-trucks were standing in line. Immediately, my girlfriend climbed into the next room. I leashed the dog and stood next to the car, and as she walked to the front door, I thought I heard someone yell behind me. To my surprise, it was a trucker sitting in the driver's seat of his truck, with the window down, trying to get my attention. In general, I'm a pretty nice person to all people, whether they seem shady or not. As a rule, ready to lend a hand. Behind me in the truck was an older gentleman, large with gray hair and wearing sunglasses. His truck was so loud I really couldn't hear what he was saying, so I yelled back, "What?" The trucker yelled something muffled 3 more times as I asked him what, shaking my head and looking up to let him know I couldn't hear him. At this point, he looked visibly annoyed that I said that 4 times. Good. Which, well, that's understandable. I wanted to see what was up with this guy, so I walked halfway between the car and his passenger truck. "What did you say?" I asked. "Can you help me find my phone?" "I lost it somewhere," said the trucker. I was very caught off guard at this point, as it all happened in the 20-30 seconds we were parked at the stop. It was strange to me that the trucker would ask a random person stopping at the bus stop to help find their phone, but maybe he just wanted me to call. "Where did you lose it?" I asked. "I lost it in the truck. Can you come over here and help me look for it?" The trucker replied in a really annoying tone. At that moment, I was really drawn. I thought I was going to be kidnapped. I could have called, but I wasn't going to get into the trucker's cab to find his phone. "Yes, I'm good," I said sternly, but half-heartedly, because I almost thought this guy was kidding me. After a few moments, the trucker says, "Won't you help me look for him?" My adrenaline was pumping, so I yelled back, "Get out of here!" in a menacing tone, knowing I had nothing to protect us if something went wrong. I put Dog back in the car and took out my phone to pretend I was calling the police. As he drove slowly and then stopped again to ask if I was going to help, I yelled again, "Don't leave here. I'm calling the police." And after that answer, he pressed the gas and left the freeway. I stood there watching as my girlfriend finally got off the bus, wondering why I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I don't know if this was an overreaction, but the fact that he asked me to get into his truck blew me away. So my husband and I were working together at the time this happened. They went to and from work together every day. Please also note that we had a pet cat named Sammy. But no one lived with us anymore, and we owned our house, so the landlords didn't come in when we were out or anything like that. One day we come home from work, and there he is on the floor in the middle of the kitchen, an egg, a single egg, no cracks and in perfect condition. The amazing part? We didn't have any eggs, not in the fridge. We didn't eat them often, so we had those frozen egg whites that come in a carton. There are no eggs, and they haven't been in the house for a very long time. They broke the head, threw the egg, and that's it. By the next day, we come home, and there is another egg, right in the middle of the kitchen floor again. Now we are scared. Once was amazing enough, but 2... We considered hacking this, but decided against it and just threw it away. It's also surprising that it never happened again. And to this day, many years later, we remember the time Sammy laid eggs in the kitchen, but we still haven't found a plausible explanation for what it was. The whole thing was just amazing. I planted trees near Smithers, BC, about an hour and a half up the mountains on dirt roads. I've tried really hard to forget that this incident even happened because I just can't find a way to rationalize it. It was almost midnight, and I was trying to sleep in my tent. My tent was near a pile of standing dead trees that creaked as the wind picked up. It was a very loud and clear sound, and on this night it was still and quiet. I began to hear the cracking of sticks and footsteps that seemed to be slowly approaching for about 15 minutes. It was loud enough for me to be sure the bear was approaching my tent, and he came so close that he couldn't have been more than 15 feet away. Cracking sticks and stomping on the forest floor, I decided to scream very loudly, but there was silence. I was answered with nothing but deafening silence, not a sound of the creature fleeing or doing anything. I just sat there in silence, afraid to move, trying to rationalize with no conclusion. After about 20 minutes of dead silence, I heard the most horrible, unnatural, and inexplicable noise I've ever heard. It was the same wood and volume, and basically the same sound as the creaking trees outside. But instead of being a regular screech, it started and then held the exact same screech for a full 5 seconds or even longer. It sounded like an unnatural hum that was obviously not a tree creaking. Mind you, there was no hint of wind or other trees that would normally creak. I don't know what it was, but what I'm trying to say is that it was unnatural and strange. I hardly slept that night, and the next day was very difficult. I just tried to forget about it, but I never realized that skinwalkers were known to imitate sounds like that until maybe a few weeks ago. This happened in July 2022. I don't know, it was an amazing experience. I'm not saying it was a skinwalk, but it was amazing. If anyone has had a similar experience or has any ideas as to what it could be, I'd love to hear it. This story, we have to rewind a little to last summer. It was the night of August 12th specifically, and it was the night that the meteor shower took place. With the intention of watching the meteor shower, my partner and I packed a towel and a packed lunch and headed to a large park in our town. This park has a large wooded area which we thought was the perfect place to watch the sky as it was almost pitch black. We had to use phone flashlights to navigate, and chose a place to put the towel so you can imagine how dark it was. We arrive, turn off the flashlight, and I play some relaxing music on my phone. We both looked at the sky, but when we looked around us it was pitch black. The only light was in the horizon line. It may not seem relevant at the moment, but I was wearing a sundress that had to be tied around the waist, and I untied it to make it more comfortable in the position I was lying in. After 10 minutes of unsuccessfully trying to see the shooting star, I lower my vision and start paying attention to my surroundings. Then to my left, my boyfriend is sitting on the right, still looking at the sky. I notice some movement. I try to focus my eyes on him. I can only see a brief outline, but I can tell that someone or something is approaching us. My first thought was, oh, it's a dog, but somehow I feel uneasy and can't take my eyes off it. As it gets closer and I can see more of it, the distant lights on the horizon line seem to illuminate it, and I tell my partner that something is coming our way. I think it might be a dog. Before I finish the sentence, it hit me. It was not a dog, it is a man, but he crawls on all fours in a sort of animalistic manner with his chest pressed to the ground. My boyfriend, he also saw it, jumped to his feet. I felt paralyzed with fear as he urged me to stand. He told me, "I will take our things, you need to get up." I tried to tie my dress, but I was so nervous that I couldn't. "Come on, we have to leave," he said. He took my hand and we rushed through the forest towards the lighted part of the park. I couldn't stop looking around. We were both pretty shocked by this, but eventually got out of there, and I was very thankful that I wasn't alone in the woods that night. Guys, I would like to tell you about a disturbing experience that happened to me about 10 years ago this fall. I was born and still live in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. My younger years were around the old observatory, around Moores Mountain Road and Observatory Drive, if you know the place. But even then I felt this area was a bit out of place. The forest just wasn't quite right. The open fields seemed, I don't know, eerie. The roads never seemed to lead where you thought they would go. Moores Mountain Church boasted the spook holes, which were a logging road that just blew out that stank horribly. But anyway, most nights I'll be heading to New Cumberland for a cold beer and darts, and one night in October, 2012 was no different. On the way back, shortly after midnight, I was driving Route 382 east of Lewisberry. As I approached John Brenneman's house on the right, just before Brenneman Drive, I saw someone coming towards me on the side of the road. True, it was late, but it was quite mild for October, so it is possible that someone is walking along the road. But the strange thing was that he was very tall, 6'6" or taller, and very, very thin. In the few seconds I looked at him, I noticed he was dressed in all black pants, a tight black cloak, very, very dark skin, and short dark hair. He either limped or had difficulty walking. When I sort of discussed slowing down, I mean maybe someone had an accident. He then suddenly dropped to all fours and quickly ran across the road in front of me. He has a face that, as I said, was jet black. But now that I got a better look at it, it's a cross between what I can only describe as human and canine. And then he was gone. I didn't think much of it when I got home, but over the next day or two I started getting goosebumps. Obviously, I didn't tell anyone for a few days, but then I told a few close friends. Being self-employed and afraid of ridicule, I refrained from making much noise about it. While I've always been an enthusiast of the paranormal, cryptozoology, ghosts, etc., I've always been a dinner-in-the-wall skeptic, you might say. I cannot explain what I saw or begin to postulate what it was. I only know that I saw it, and it scared me. I did some research, and the closest I got was a picture in Texas of a stilt walker, which, yes, you can look up online if you want to get an idea of what it looked like. It happened about 9 years ago and sometimes crosses my mind. It always freaks me out every time this happens. Yes, I was on an adult dating site. One of the fetishists I know. Don't judge me. I was just looking for some fun. Anyway, I was stupid and gave more information than I probably should have. I was talking to a guy. He asked me at one point what I did for work. I was working at McDonald's at the time, and I told him. He asked which one, and I stupidly told him which one. We chatted non-stop. We didn't talk for too long, and I also stupidly gave him my phone number at some point. He talked about wanting to meet me during the break, have fun on my break. I told him no thanks. I don't bring my lifestyle to my work. Anyway, I checked my messages right before I left work, and luckily I did because he mentioned he was at my work and told me he ordered a meal with a large poppy seed. I said, "Oh, well, don't expect me to do anything to you, I'm not interested." Then he got upset and apparently couldn't accept that I wasn't interested. I also freaked out because I didn't send him a picture of my face but never got one back from him. I really wasn't too interested in him, so I decided I didn't need a face picture because I wasn't going to date him anyway. His interests weren't what I was looking for, and it's hard for me to immediately say, "I'm not interested," and just slowly started thinking about the ones I wasn't really interested in. Now, luckily, I didn't tell him my work schedule, so he didn't know I was going to stop. So after I finished work, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site, and some guy had just come to work, and I had no idea what he looked like, and that I was going to hang out in the back room rest. Luckily, she didn't judge me and said, "Oh, okay." So I waited for about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at that time, and I also had to go home, and I was afraid that he would see me and try to pick me up in his car. Fortunately, no one was following me, so I seemed to be in the clear. But it scares me that some random person just decided that he will show up at my job and expects me to want to meet him like that. It was also foolish of me to go home that night. I mean, anything could happen. But this whole experience has thankfully opened my eyes and made me more aware of the information I give to strangers. I've definitely learned my lesson and won't do it again. That's for sure. I, a 33-year-old woman, was about 20 years old. At that time, I had a dog named Nina, a boxer. She died when she was 8 years old from lung cancer, and I miss her so much. However, Nina was very energetic, so I took her for long walks around the neighborhood, usually at the end of the day, around 4-6 p.m., when it wasn't too hot but not dark either. It is necessary to know about Nina that she loved people. She didn't get along with other dogs, but every time she saw someone walking near us, she would wag her tail and want to come closer and ask for pets. One day we went for our usual walk. Everything was fine for the most part. I saw a few more dog trainers walking their dogs and an old couple sitting in front of the house talking. And then when we were alone, Nina suddenly started grumbling. One thing I should also mention is that I have a degree in biology and a majoring in animal behavior. I was finishing college at the time this story took place, so I paid a lot of attention to my dog's behavior and had quite a bit of knowledge about dog behavior because it was my favorite subject in the area. Dogs see movement much better than we do, so things like a raised eyebrow or a slight tension in the shoulders, they can easily pick up on. So sure, a dog growling doesn't sound that weird, I know, but Nina did growl at other dogs and cats when she saw them. But this was different. She was very short, and all the fur on her back was down. Her whole demeanor was alarming. And then I noticed her looking back, snarling. So I briefly looked around a block away and saw a man. This alarmed me even more because Nina had never yelled at anyone on the street before, She never stopped walking beside me or tried to pull away, but she continued to growl quietly and continued to stare at this guy. I started to freak out a little and turned to the next block. She stopped for a second, but when we got to the next corner, she started roaring again, and there he was again. He didn't try to talk to me or call me or anything like that. His expression was also very serious, I think a bit emotionless. I continued to walk randomly, and he was always there. This means that this person was definitely following me. At some point, our distance started to close, and Nina growled louder, so when I turned the next corner, I just started running until he saw me. I ran about 4 blocks in the direction of an area where I knew there were more people and people. I stopped to catch my breath and looked behind me. He was far away, just around the corner from where I started running, just there, standing there looking at me. Nina was also looking at him, still with a worried expression. After a minute, he turned around and walked in the same direction he had come from, and Nina finally relaxed. I continued to pay attention to Nina's behavior all the way home, but she was her usual happy self. Now I told this story to my parents and several neighbors, and no one seemed to know a man like him. I never saw him either, and Nina never behaved like that again, ever. So I guess I'll never know who he was or why he was following me, but I sure don't regret trusting Nina's instincts. I mean, if it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have even known that person was behind me. I guess the lesson here is that people should pay as much attention to their pet's behavior as possible. It's not about a supernatural sixth sense or anything. They can actually feel, see, and hear things better than we can. And there is no behavior that happens without a reason. There is always a reason. So, stay safe, everyone. We live in a small town in the Midwest. She works in an old elementary school as a music teacher. We also live across the street from a cemetery where we both saw a creepy apparition. I'm still skeptical, to be honest. But when she started working at school, she came home with a very strange story about how her pencil cup was always thrown on the floor when she came to work in the morning. At first, she thought I was just being mean. Then she blamed it on the cup, then the table, and then maybe the floor was uneven. But it happened every night, and she found her pens scattered everywhere, and the cup somewhere on the ground. Finally, she stopped talking about it, and finally the custodian complained to the administrator that my wife was dropping her pens on the floor and leaving a mess on him. A cup with a handle still happens almost daily, but when my wife was alone playing the national anthem in her classroom after school, apparently the piano was making a sound that she said sounded like someone was sitting directly on the piano. She said it was short, unpleasant, and a burst of piano notes and then just silence. She said she slowly got out and put it out of her mind because who knows? Maybe there was a rat in the piano or something. The last one is the worst for me, and the school has some kind of second story that was never finished. It is used as a huge storage loft. It can be accessed from a stairwell outside the building. Other teachers have experienced similar things, but my wife didn't believe it until last night. She gave a private lesson to a high school girl who wants to study opera. The girl left, and while my wife was gathering her things to go home, she heard someone running at full speed from the inaccessible side of the attic toward the stairs. She could hear running from one end to the other, and it was inhumanly fast. And then nothing. She said it actually scared her and ended up running to her car. And as strange as it sounds, she likes these experiences. I, on the contrary, somehow fear for her. But what should we do about it? And can we do anything about it? Let me know. So, I've always believed in the paranormal to some extent, but I didn't believe that spirits and demons were commonplace. That is, until some things happened to me as an adult. I experienced a few things as a child that my mother also witnessed, so I knew there was some truth to it all. About 4 years ago, one night I experienced something that changed my life forever. At first I was very excited about what had happened, but then, like the flick of a switch, everything just went dark. Very dark. You see, I researched my own experience, did everything I could or saw on TV, and yes, I now know it was a huge mistake. But at the time I was trying to get answers and was willing to do whatever I could, even what I always swore I'd never do, trying to use the spirit board. I did all my investigation by myself, another mistake, and I went to the cemetery where it all started. by myself at any hour of the night. Another big mistake. However, one day, I had a good idea to download the Spirit Board app on my phone. The first time I used it, I got exactly what I expected: garbage. But I didn't give up, and after a few tries I gave it another go, and this time things were a little different. I sat at the kitchen table, turned on the program, and started asking questions. The answers came quickly and accurately, and I thought, wow, maybe this time it really worked. Obviously, I was still very skeptical about the whole thing and thought to myself, I'm going to debunk this thing and call it a fake. I asked if they could see me. The answer was yes. I asked his name. They gave me Maria. I then asked where I was sitting. The answer was the kitchen table. I asked what I was wearing. It answered correctly. I then asked, where are you? It answered, nearby in the basement. I thought to myself, now I have you. So I replied, oh, so you're in the red brick floor next door? It answered no. I asked, what house are you in? And my blood ran cold from the answer. It answered, a gray 2-story corner, abandoned. Now, if you are looking out my kitchen window, there is a gray 2-story building on the corner of another street, and it has been abandoned for several years. There is also a basement, not a cellar. I have continued to have conversations with this Spirit Board app for months. One day I started at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't stop until almost 7 a.m., and it felt like 20 minutes. And this Mariah could tell me things about me that no one else could know. He will tell me about the calls I received years ago when I was a police officer and what I saw and felt. My hauntings became very horrible over the years, and I still deal with them daily and even every night. My house was investigated, and they also got Mariah's name, which they said was actually a succubus that was apparently attached to me. I stopped using the spiritual app a long time ago, but I'm still dealing with very real issues with using it, and apparently not closing the door when I'm done, using it on my own, and so on and so forth. I'm here to tell you, just because you use it and have no problems doesn't mean your time won't come. And if that happens, frankly, I'm sorry for what you're going to have to deal with. Please, whatever you do, take it seriously and use it very carefully. I wish I had been more careful myself. Back when I was 14 or 15 years ago, a group of us would always hang out together, about 8 or 10 of us, sneaking around alleyways, etc., looking for cool places to explore. One evening, not far from our house, we found a small fenced area with an open plot of land and a closed garage. The open area was large enough to accommodate a large tree trunk as a bench of sorts, as well as various metal rods and oil canisters. It was a bit of a mess, but there was also an old JCB digger in the center of that piece of land. The backhoe took up most of the space so you could get a sense of its size. But we were all climbing on this thing when suddenly a man appears in the driver's seat who appeared out of nowhere. But the strangest thing is that it was completely black and white with a slight glow. We all saw him and screamed and panicked and jumped off the JCB and hid around a tree trunk, barrels, etc. And he just sat there, still, for maybe 20 seconds or so. And then we watched him just disappear. However, what I find quite unique about it is that it was a relatively large group of us all seeing the same thing. We began to share what we saw, and everyone was quick to outdo each other, describing the same thing. All these years later, we still talk about it and the story hasn't changed. We were just playing around, and this black and white guy appeared and then disappeared again. It's strange to me because whenever I've watched paranormal, it never seems like a large group of people or everyone is seeing something at the same time. Unfortunately, we didn't have cameras or phones back then. Otherwise, we would have probably had a few photos of what we saw. But this is my story. I still remain a bit of a skeptic when others claim to see ghosts. I don't know why, but this experience definitely opened my mind to things beyond. First, my mom has 2 dogs. One is a pit lab mix, and the other is an Australian shepherd mix. They like to get out often. First and foremost, this is her pit lab. His name is Big. If I remember, the previous owner named him that because of Biggie Smalls, and the Australian shepherd is called Luna. They are cute dogs. I'm sure it wouldn't hurt anyone if they didn't have to, but like I said, they get out of the house a lot and like to run around the grounds. The big one is the only one that really comes out. He broke windows, screens, even chewed through doors. He has a lot of anxiety issues when it comes to being home alone, and Luna just follows him. He's now on medication and has had some training and is definitely not as bad as before, but it is still a problem, and my mom has called the police on it once or twice. Mom was always afraid he'd been shot because she lives in an area where there are a lot of hunters, and there's such a stigma around pit bulls. And she is also afraid of the same thing with Luna, because she has very long legs, and she is afraid that one day someone might mistake her for a deer. However, Luna is a good dog in her own right, and rarely runs away unless she is on a leash. She is basically a follower. Anyway, the following snippet is from my mom and my mom's neighbor Erica's account. She usually calls my mom when the dogs get out. Since they know her, they have no problem approaching her personally. However, when they came out the other day, my mom was able to arrange them with Erica's help. But later that night, my mom got a call from Erica to tell her that the dogs were out again. My mom was confused because they were both sleeping at the foot of her bed. Mom even sent her a photo of them lying on the bed together. Erica ended up calling my mom thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't, and my mom was honest with her. Erica sent a photo to my mom, and one of the dogs looked exactly like Big. He has a very specific birthmark above his nose that looks kind of like a wobbly T-shape, I guess. And the photo looked exactly like Big, from the birthmark to even the behavior from afar, and everything was really creepy. There was even a point where my mom thought Erica was joking, and all she could do was reassure my mom that it wasn't a joke. However, in my opinion, Erica made the worst decision she could have made, and decided to open the front door for her. And according to her, the imposter dog gave her the most evil look a dog can have. She said the dog growled at her and showed its teeth. Mom even heard on the phone. This prompted my mom to run over to Erica's house to see the dog. And sure enough, there he was, barking at Erica's door after she went inside. It was also a stupid decision on my mom's part. But after the first meeting, she ran home and called me crying about the ordeal, which is very unlike her. Apparently, another neighbor named Dean called the police because he said he was taking Luna out and terrorizing his chickens. Now the rest of this story is from me and what I experienced. I live an hour away from my mom, so I get in the car and drive to her house. 3 or 4 police cars parked on a rural street in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. To be honest, it was weird to see, but when I got there, the cops were asking my mom about her dogs along with Erica, and the other cops, I guess, were looking around for those dogs. I could hear my mom's dogs whining through the front door at the commotion. They even looked through the window. Obviously, it wasn't evil or anything, and eventually the cops came to the conclusion that it wasn't my mom's dogs. Eventually, they left, and when I went to lead Luna, I made sure to stay with her and double-check myself to make sure there was nothing that could hurt her. When I looked in the back of my mother's house, I saw them. 2 dogs that looked almost like Luna and Big were standing next to me looking at me, not moving at all. Their tails didn't even wag. Needless to say, I was in a frenzy. Luna saw them and got scared. In fact, I've never seen her react like that before. I mean, teeth, fur, and all that. Seriously, she never acted like that. I was even afraid to go near her for fear that she might hurt me. But eventually she comes to me, snarling and baring her teeth. She let me unhook her and lead her inside, but she wouldn't leave the back door for the rest of the night, like she was waiting for something to happen. They stood there for a very long time. It was at least a few minutes because my mom called the police and reported it. Some were still in the area, but they eventually left. Admittedly, I really don't know much about dogs, and although I was around these 2 years, I know for a fact that they did not act like dogs. I mean, the way they were looking at me and the way they were standing there so still, emotionless, from what I could tell, it really scared me. Several days passed, and these dogs were never found. Dean still isn't sure it wasn't my parents' dogs, and I stayed with my mom for a day or 2 to comfort her. Now I believe in Wendigo, and I believe in skinwalkers and the paranormal, but I've never really experienced anything like that. But if it's anything like that, I don't want to experience anything like that ever again. So far, I haven't even noticed anything strange on my parents' property. I know the skinwalkers will take their prey and use their corpse or whatever to try and lure people to their deaths, but her dogs are alive and well, and those, well, things had tails. so I don't think the skinwalker's very much in question. But it's just strange that two dogs that look like Mom's dogs are standing next to each other in the field. Perhaps it was a coincidence. I don't know. Maybe they were just two angry dogs and they still look like my mom's dogs. One with the same unique birthmark and the same distinct features and all. Or, I don't know, maybe it was something else. My parents and I lived in a small old house in a sleepy neighborhood for about 7 years. During this time, my parents were fighting almost constantly. Bad fights, too. Physical blows and even pushing and pulling. They acted positively demonic as they fought, and it was almost every day for hours on end. We noticed that there were other things going on in the house. My dad would wake up to find various things seemingly off when they were firmly installed the night before. We had an unfinished basement, and every time I went down there at night to do laundry, I literally had to pray to God because the feeling of intense fear and dread was so strong. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was just horrible. It was almost like when I had my back to the room, digging in the dryer or something, I felt like the prey of an animal. Grandpa was visiting one day at lunchtime, and we all froze because the sound of a large garbage bag being dragged across the concrete from the basement echoed throughout the house. It does not fall, does not slide, but pulls. We all got very quiet and somehow just ignored it and went back to talking. Around the time my parents were getting treatment for their issues and reconnecting with themselves and me, that's when I fell into a deep depression. About a year after that, the nightmares started. Horrible, horrible dreams almost every night, almost always involving some dark, evil entity that wanted to hurt me. It whispered to me and told me that I should end my life. I always woke up in a panic and turned on the light. The feeling of dread began to increase, and I stayed up all night to avoid the dreams. I remember one night when I was alone in the living room with the lamps on, watching a Hallmark show and using headphones, and out of nowhere, I got the feeling that I was in danger. I ripped off my headphones and paused my show, and I was just sitting on the couch. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything, but I've never felt such overwhelming fear in my life. I thought I was going to choke and die or throw up from the nausea and tension I felt. I was completely frozen with fear, and then, suddenly, just like that, it passed. The last important thing happened a couple of months before we decided to move to another house. I have never told my parents about what I experienced, but I woke up around 2:30 a.m. I sleep with my dog on my bed. 17 pounds, goofy little guy, very gentle, never growled at anything, he just plays. All but this time. I heard one of my parents walk across my door to go to the bathroom, as they often did at night, but I never remembered a light coming on or a door closing, although I seem to have blamed it on my half-asleep state. But as soon as I saw that shadow under my door and heard footsteps, my beautiful obedient dog woke up and jumped on me. He let out the most angry roar he had ever done and just stared at my door. He had screams, and he was definitely protecting me from something. I still thought maybe he was surprised even though it scared me. But I woke up the next morning and asked my parents if they slept last night. They both said no, and at the same time I became very afraid. Just on the day of the move, the night before we were supposed to pack up once and for all, I had the worst dream. Invisible things beat me, threw furniture and said, "You can't leave." I woke up crying so hard I had an asthma attack. I don't even really have asthma. But the first night in our new home, there were no nightmares. I slept peacefully. We have lived here for a year now, and I have had no fear, no terror, no bad dreams, nothing. And it's amazing. But I want to clarify that I and my family are very religious. We think it's best not to talk about demons because they like to be talked about. I also want to clarify that we had absolutely nothing to attract them. No demonic media, antiques, or anything else. And yet I just know we left something there. I still get a tightness in my chest every time we drive past this place. It's a horrible place. A sad, lonely, and dark place indeed. Where I will never return. It happened a long time ago, but I still remember it well, although I'm still not quite sure what I saw that night. A few years ago, my housemates came home from college for Thanksgiving break. We ended up planning a girls' night at one of my friends', and we all planned to have a sleepover since we were going to be drinking and staying out late anyway. I had a bit of a cold and a stuffy nose, but I decided to go anyway. Of course, This was before the advent of COVID, but during the night my energy started to drop and I started to feel sicker and sicker. I couldn't breathe through my nose anymore, and since it was late, I decided to just take some cold medicine, soak it overnight, and go home early in the morning. But when we went to bed, I quickly realized that I couldn't breathe well lying down, and I was uncomfortable trying to sleep and not disturb the other girls with my sniffing and loud breathing. Around 3. At 30 a.m. I decided I couldn't take it anymore, so I quietly got up to leave. I live in 2 cities and it was very dark outside. It was cold outside, but not too cold if you needed a winter coat or something. About halfway home, I saw what looked like a man in all black sneaking around the side of the house. As I got closer, I also noticed that they were wearing a black ski mask to cover their faces. Again, it was cold outside, but not that cold. As I started to get closer to the house, a person saw my car, and I saw them bend over behind a garbage can on the side of the road. I drove past and realized pretty quickly that what I had just seen was horrible, but I felt extremely sick and delusional, and I just wanted to go home so I wouldn't have to drive back to see it again. I thought about calling the police, but to be honest, I didn't even know the addresses of the houses or what was really going on. However, when I got home, I slept on my parents' couch to breathe better and get some rest. In the morning, I told my mom about what I saw on the way home, and she didn't seem worried at all, and told me it was probably just someone taking out the trash late at night. And I guess she might be right, but I'm still wondering why he was wearing a ski mask and seemed to be hiding for a second when he noticed I was about to pass the house. Days and weeks later, I kept checking the news in that town to see if there were any reports of break-ins or robberies, but I never found anything. I still get scared just thinking about it. And who knows? Maybe the night I got sick and came back when I got sick stopped something really awful. About a year ago, I received a message on LinkedIn from a fellow networker he was a man of very little information. If there is, it's very vague. No profile picture and over 500 connections. His name is also very generic and not so easily distinguished. It's the same with the job he has. This is very general. However, I was new to LinkedIn. Just started working in the professional world and was open to talking to anyone who was in the field of my degree. I get a message from him. He asked if I was related to the lady and gave my last name. He says he went to a certain high school where this woman he named used to work as a librarian and could see hundreds or thousands of kids while she was there working. I said that this is my dad's ex-wife, and I am not related to her, but she no longer has that last name. He told me that she and I have a lot in common with working in libraries, and I responded with a smile to his message. We are not connected, not friends on LinkedIn or anywhere. He tells me he's honored to know me, to which I also respond with an emoji and no reply. After that, we chatted for a bit, and I didn't share any new information other than what was on my profile. In the weeks and months to come, he will send whenever I participate. He will. Whenever I update something, he is the first to comment and message me. It's almost like it's never offline. The last meeting was 2 days ago, when I announced my new job with the medical team, and he texted me saying he was proud of me and congratulations. I said thank you, but then he said, I looked up the name of the place. There are many. Where are you? To which I did not respond, and will never respond. I've mentioned this to people in my life, and they've said that's what LinkedIn is for. But to me, it's a creepy and borderline attitude with zero way to verify who the person really is. Last year, in December, my mother was hospitalized, and I stayed with my sister in a spare room in the basement. The first few nights were fine, but on the third night everything changed. I couldn't sleep well, and it didn't help that I kept hearing strange noises. There is a closet in the rec room, and that night I heard movement from it where it shouldn't have been. It sounded almost like, I don't know, someone or something was moving something heavy and dragging it there. The closet isn't very big, mind you, which makes it even more amazing. But I just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, even though I am a believer and have had so many paranormal encounters. I guess I just didn't want to believe it. I had already experienced a lot and was afraid that my mother would die. You know, I didn't want to worry about anything else. Anyway, sometimes the pulling noise in the closet would stop for a while and then continue. Another time there was a screeching sound outside the tiny basement window. It didn't sound like an animal. It was almost a metallic sound. I guess like a shovel or something scraping against a window. It was weird, but whatever. At one point I fell asleep, only to wake up in an almost completely dark room, even though the nightlight was on. This confused me for a moment, but I was very scared. But my fear increased when I saw a very tall man standing in the corner near the window. The man was so tall that his head almost touched the ceiling. He was wearing torn clothes, as if he had been through hard times. It looked like he had long, dark hair and a long beard that matched his hair color. He crossed his arms over his chest, and then the worst thing happened. He turned his head and looked at me. We made eye contact for a few long seconds that seemed like an eternity. It used to literally just disappear, and the room suddenly became less dark. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 4 a.m. I did not go back to sleep. I did not see the person again, but I felt that someone was watching me. I later told my sister what happened, and she was horrified. She told me not to tell her husband or daughter because they would be too scared to come back down again, which is really understandable. Since then, I have gone down to the basement several times, but I have never seen the man again, nor... I don't know who or what he was, but I hope I never see him again. It's a lot, I'm sure. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, my best friend got a Ouija board for her birthday. We loved it too. For months, we would sit with him after school, talking to those we thought were our dead relatives. Now I know that was a lie. You can only truly communicate with the demonic through this medium, or at least I believe so. However, the ghost didn't leave her board in the end. His name was Steve, which is ironic because that's also the name of our creepy neighbor. In any case, Steve didn't leave the board even when we asked to speak to our grandparents and other relatives. Our relationship with Steve became increasingly strained the longer we hung out with him. He would threaten our pets and even our own lives eventually. We thought it was exciting until one day he went too far. On this day, we brought a third friend to play with us. We sat in a circle as usual with our ankles crossed near the board. After playing around a bit and realizing it was Steve, we decided to say our goodbyes. Only this time, we didn't finish saying goodbye, because when we looked down, all 3 of them had scratches on their ankles. We shook hands and got up very quickly, ending the conversation without saying goodbye. Big mistake. Then we decided that we needed to get rid of this board, so we took it with us for a short walk to a nearby pond. I held the triangle, my best friend held the board, and my third friend held the box. We threw each of them in different places in the same pond, and we left feeling like $1,000,000 singing Steve's crap and everything. It wasn't until later that night that we realized we had screwed up royally. I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. All I can say is the energy in my room. It was darker than usual. The shadows were blacker than usual. But then I noticed that these shadows, they started to move. It was like a whole demonic portal opened up in my room and the energy just went out of whack. The first night was also definitely the worst. I felt very alone. I was very scared. I hid my face under the blanket and somehow fell asleep again. The next day I told my friends about it, and they couldn't believe it. The same thing happened to them at the same time. We figured out what that meant pretty quickly, but now whatever it was bothering us, and for the next 3 months we had to wake up in the same spot pretty much every night. We even had a group chat and we didn't talk on it until 3 a.m. It was terrifying to say the least, and we really thought it would never end. The third friend was a bit upset with us because she only played with us on that one horrible day, and I honestly felt sorry for her. Anyway, this story does have a bit of a happy ending, sort of. The ghosts ended one day after a very bad storm. Somehow, and I have no idea how, this board ended up in my friend's backyard again. But the amazing thing is that it was fully assembled back in the box with no water damage. It makes absolutely no sense, I know, but a friend of mine kept it under the stairs in the basement for years. After that, we never hung out in the basement alone again. In the end, she did something kind of mean, I guess, but she left it with a friend after a sleepover. Pretty sure the girl doesn't even know she has it. But after that, her basement didn't seem creepy anymore, and we never woke up at 3 a.m. to see that sight again. From which, obviously, we felt a real relief. But after this whole experience, I promised myself that I would never mess with these things again.